They had no means to rouse him. The giant lay unconscious in the rude throne formed from the collapse of the water tower. His snores had brought the townspeople to gather before him. "Does anyone know who this is?" Curtis the Strangler asked amid the babble of voices. He stood atop a plastic milk crate and pointed to the giant. As no one seemed to have an answer, the Strangler singled Fudge Wills, the town's mayor, out from the crowd. "Well, we've got to do something about this," he directed his words at Wills. "He's asleep," Wills pointed out, as if there was a universal law of etiquette regarding such situations. "Fudge, the men from the Department of Infrastructure are supposed to be here today to begin repairs on the water tower," the Strangler explained. "We've got to get him out of here." "Won't they be responsible for moving him?" Barbara Crud asked. Just as they would if some leaves of branches had fallen on the tower. "This is stupid," Connor Brandemil whispered to his friend Matador. "Let's go. It'll take them all day to figure this out," he added across the top of his car as he opened his driver's side door. "How do you think a giant wound up passed out in the wreckage of your town's water tower?" Matador asked as he buckled up. "God knows," Brandemil replied, "but this kind of thing happens all the time around here. Once an armada of dirigibles flew off with the church steeple." As he cranked his car, several people in the crowd turned to stare. How could anyone leave this disturbing scene? "Oh, it's the Brandemil boy. He's always been a little bit strange. Intelligent, but strange." "And one time," Brandemil continued as he headed back to his parents' house, "one of the old drunks that live here built a personal flying saucer out of a chicken feeder trough." "Really?" Matador knitted his brows together. "Those are the trees he knocked down in it," Brandemil pointed at. As they got out of the car, the two men heard a cacophony of car horns sounded at once a mile and a half away. "They're going to get more than they expect," Brandemil predicted. A scattering of artifacts incites nationalistic feeling. The excitement over Trip Aaron's death in his homemade flying saucer had only begun to reach its peak when further fuel was added to the fire. "This is more than one man can take," exclaimed Doc Vetman as he wiped the sweat from his brow, by the discovery of nearly a dozen bizarre artifacts in the dirt around the crash site. Evidently Tripp's craft plowed up these items, Brock Yammer, who worked for the university, theorized. He and a group of the town's most prominent men had gathered in the tiny city hall to examine the find. "How long do you think they've been buried?" Rondo Gavel, the editor of the local paper, the Bunworthy Fundamentalist, asked. "Well, I only work in the home economics department, you understand, but I would say a very long time." Yammer tapped his watch for emphasis. Fudge Wills, the 7-term mayor of Bunworthy, drew himself up from peering at the collection of objects spread over the town council's conference table and inhaled deeply through his nose, preparatory to delivering himself of a weighty profundity. "Friends," he began, "this discovery will put our little town on the map." Several of the men in the room, Yammer and Gavel among them, glanced at the county map mounted just behind Wills, where the name Bunworthy was printed for all to see. Wills rolled his eyes to the extreme left and inhaled once more. "I'm going to call the governor," he announced, returning his gaze to his fellow Bunworthians. He made for the phone. "What for?" Yammer asked. "This is big," replied Wills. "Yes, too big for our little town," Yammer worried. "Those big shots, the university men, they'll crowd us out." "We can't keep it a secret," Gavel pointed out. "Hello," Wills roared into the phone. "This is Fudge Wills, mayor of Bunworthy. I need to speak to the governor. This is a matter of archaeological and historical importance." The viceroy, having been in turn contacted by the governor, gave specific directions to his underlings. "Send somebody big down there to take care of this," he ordered. "We can't run the risk of any foreign agents getting their hands on these artifacts." The bear attends the badger's reading. Merle the badger had known that his reading of selections from his new book would not be enough to draw the crowd he wanted, nor to leave it with a feeling of having received a full evening's worth of entertainment. Thus, Merle had arranged for the Kent Windsock Quintet to play both before and after he had given his reading. One person who did not require the presence of the musicians on the roster was Tragic the Bear. As a matter of fact, he was put off by the kind of contemporary smooth jazz that Kent Windsock played. "It's just too slick," he often complained to his friends. "It's the kind of music that ethnics put on to make love to." On hearing this complaint, Tragic's friends would usually cock an eyebrow and repeat, "Ethnics?" with disapproval. However, such was Tragic's appreciation for Merle's writing that he was willing to put up with Kent Winslock and the unadvertised surprise addition of two background vocalists moaning about an oasis in the ghetto. He did question whether this was the best Merle could do, putting this thought down in a small notebook he carried in a pocket in his adventurous-type vest. Is Merle the Badger so unappreciated in this city that he can only get these crappy performers to be seen with him, Tragic wrote? Or, and I cannot believe this, can he be unaware of the concrete crappiness of this kind of jazz? The name of Merle the Badger's new book was Benny's Snakes. It was a novel concerning the efforts of the evil General Holiday to secure absolute control over his planet of origin using a powerful mind control device. But of course, as with all of Merle's fiction, that was merely the backdrop for a host of subtly interconnected stories. Francis lifted the whip once more, Merle read aloud. His voice was strong and flexible, itself like a whip. He gave each character a unique sound. Tragic nibbled the ends of his claws in nervous excitement. "Please, Mr. Francis, don't hit me again," Marla cried out, jerking the rag off her head in fear. "This is outrageous," Tragic heard a bearded, middle-aged man at the table to his right mutter. Merle paused in his reading to peer over his glasses at the man. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to the audience, "Mr. Bob Janes." Non-steroidal ambiguity. Despite its misgivings, Whagam did not alter the story. It was included, along with the others he had written during the long winter, in the collection Have We No Conscience, and published the following year. He heard nothing for some time. His books had limited appeal anyway. Only a small fringe publishing house like Fishstick would ever be willing to publish his work. Finally, however, he received the letter he had been waiting for. "Mr. Whagam, I had no idea you were a racist. Your story, Consumption in the Time of Funk, has both sickened and disillusioned me." It went on from there, much as Whagam had expected. It was signed, "Darla Shipmate." "I figured the odds at 50-50 whether she would include her address," Whagam told his personal assistant Glader. "But how will you find her?" Glader, holding the envelope, asked as he watched his employer pack his suitcase with the Star Trek-inspired clothing he preferred. "This is a post office box." "Yes, but from a small town. I looked Frankville up in the atlas. It only has a population of 200. In a town that small, I'll surely be able to find her." Whagam closed the suitcase and extended his hand. "So long, Glader. If you don't hear from me in 2 weeks, contact Fishstick House. Tell them to proceed with the collection of my juvenilia." "Good luck," Glader wished Whagam. The doubt showed on his face. Frankville was a 2-day drive north into the cod and maple syrup district. Whagam spent the night at a hotel along the way where he got an idea for a play. Although he disdained titling things beforehand, he knew he would call it Running from the Waffle. The main character would be a poor ex-lumberjack, steadfast in his devotion to the occult practices that had excluded him from society. Giggling to himself, Whagam lay on the lumpy bed writing dialogue. He had many good ideas for scenes involving Pat the lumberjack and the various characters who would stop by the small pharmacy he had opened. Eventually, exhausted by his efforts, Whagam decided to order a pizza. When it arrived, he was stunned to see that the delivery person was Carl Burling, a classmate from high school. "What are you doing here?" Whagam asked, but the answer was abstruse and unsatisfactory. The trees of Gomez's passion. As Gomez gathered leaves from the lower branches for his supper, 2 Hamburg-topped agents from Central Sulfuric sat watching him from inside a car across the street. Their car was old, so old that it didn't have headrests on its bench seats, but it was clean. Its paint job was flawless, the interior spotless. Agent Grob, the one behind the wheel, had specifically requested this vehicle, not because of its condition, however, but because its radio, also vintage, was inadequate by modern standards. It did not have any means of playing outside media. The CDs that Agent Senna, the one in the passenger seat, had brought along were useless. Senna sat fuming while Grob noted Gomez's appearance on a small pad. Subject is attired in what appears to be a uniform inspired by those worn on Star Trek, the original series, Grob said aloud as he jotted down the words. "Not that next generation crap." "Are you going to write that last part down too?" Senna, who could not read Grob's shorthand, asked. "Of course not," Grob sighed. "You know, you could have told me there wasn't a CD player in the car before I lugged all these out here," Senna groused, referring to the bag of music he had brought. "Sorry." Grob did not take his eyes off Gomez. The latter had filled a basket with the tenderest leaves he could find, and was now scouring the ground for nuts fallen from the upper branches. "What kind of trees are those?" Senna asked. "I don't know," Grob replied. "Some kind of pecan?" "Pecan leaves aren't edible." "Okay, so they're not pecans." The two agents sat in silence for a while. "You can't even pick up any decent radio stations on this thing." Cinna twisted the knobs on the radio vainly. "Thank God," Grob growled in relief. Cinna stared at his fellow agent's profile. "You're a shit, do you know that?" The corners of his mouth turned down with bitterness. "He's heading back to the house," Grob announced, glancing at his watch. "I remember this title. While rummaging through the linen closet in preparation for winter, I came across the unfinished manuscript for Superintendent Curtow's autobiography. I read the title with amusement. The Algebraic Nemesis on Impromptu Island. Oh, what high hopes Curtow had had for its publication. "Maybe they'll make a movie out of it," he enthused as he held a steaming mug of hot chocolate under his sparsely whiskered chin. I smiled in return. "You know," I said, "in Great Britain they call them films. And in the Aldufig Union they call them Kirschpuffer. What's your point?" Curtow put down his mug with a definite sound of ceramic against wood. I think it was at this moment that I decided to do whatever I could to sabotage his literary ambitions. I thumbed through the pages of the manuscript. Curtow had cleverly disguised his autobiography in the form of hundreds of short stories in which a myriad of characters spoke for and against him. He did not limit himself to the events of his life, but also included his opinions on subjects ranging from the banal to the sublime. The pages were water-stained from the rain that fell the night I stole the manuscript from Curtow's overturned car, leaving the man himself bleeding and unconscious. He lived, but it was over a month before he remembered the book. Don't pity him. His distress at losing nearly a year of work was soon subsumed in what was later to become his life's calling, writing plays. I tried to distract him, but failed. "What about your job?" I reminded him. "The building can find someone else to take care of it," he replied, not looking away from the model of a set design. "You know," I tried again, "this is a tough town to try to make it as a playwright." "Really?" he snapped, sparing me a terrible glance. "Where is it easy to make it? Tell me, and I'll go there." I stalked from his rooms and descended to my laboratory deep beneath the monument to brotherhood. There I painted an allegory of my frustration. When the man from the gallery came to choose pictures for my next exhibition, they were immediately drawn to this colossal canvas. However, on being told that it was called Smear Me with the Shit of 1,000 Leprous Clowns, they moved on. Brute indifference to the skeptical review. Bronson tossed the latest issue of Beat Enthusiast onto the coffee table and sat back on the sofa, hands folded over his belly. "Well," Brolin, his cousin, asked. "I will proceed with my plans," Bronson replied. His eyes roamed among Brolin's collection of men's adventure paperbacks, each series in sequence on the bookshelves to his right. "Even after reading that?" Brolin was incredulous. "That's just one man's opinion," Bronson stubbornly stated. "Well," Brolin nodded dismissively, "it's your money." "It certainly is," Bronson interjected. "But it sounds to me like that Deflanger is nothing but a scam." "Something tells me it's not." "It certainly is an informed, objective analysis," Brolin characterized his cousin's reason thusly. He trusted the opinions of the experts, and if the young and cosmetically appealing people writing for Beat Enthusiasts didn't count as experts, then he didn't know who would. Who was Bronson to reject their advice? He hadn't finished college. The 2 men's argument ground to a halt as the sun set and the children re-entered the house, tired from their exertions and hungry for supper. "How about we order pizza?" Brolin suggested, to the cheerful affirmation of the kids. "You eat what you want," Bronson loftily snorted. "I'm eating my beets." Brolin glanced at Bronson but said nothing. In the days to come, the women, returned from their mountaintop retreat, were to reassert their control over the details of the household routine. For now, however, it remained for Jed, the robotic servant, to keep track of whose socks were whose and try to get the beet juice stains out of Mickey's T-shirt. "It is most peculiar, sir," Jed told Brolin, "but this stain appears to be in the shape of the standard character for the Bargese word Cedo." "What does that mean?" Brolin asked. "Muffin." Brolin mused on this as he sat down with the Paralyzer number 27. Sally's second edition. Another hard week at the offices of Murphy Brothers Papermine had ended. Sally wished her 2 closest co-workers a pleasant weekend and walked toward her car. Her mouth fell open when she saw the small blue ribbon tied around her car's antenna. Burgo was back in town, she thought. So. In the past, she might have been frightened, but now, after the death of Willie and all of the tragedies she'd endured over the previous year, all this combined with her end-of-the-week weariness, she felt only an angry determination. Snatching the ribbon off the antenna, Sally entered her vehicle and turned on the radio. The hit songs of her senior year of high school fed fire in her belly. Sally's home was a converted land-bound yachting sphere bequeathed to her by the city council out of sympathy for her bereavement. She expected to see Burgo sitting on the steps or leaning on her mailbox, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Maybe he was lying in wait at her old house. She hoped so. She got out of the car and checked her mail. There was a thick, padded envelope inside the box. The return address was Taltra Gipsoformia. Of course. It must be the book she ordered. This was confirmed when she got inside the roughly kettle-shaped dwelling. The package did indeed contain an original second edition of Moll Protoncel's flag-waving witch at the bald man's throat. All known copies of the first edition are owned by Major Davenport, Sally remembered as she thumbed through the book. As she idly fantasized about reading the book, she discovered that the bookseller had included a free bookmark. It was a thin, blue ribbon imprinted with the words, 2 eyes to see, but only one mouth. Who would suspect there's brains in the South? Sally's gasp of shock at the coincidence turned into a brief scream of surprise when Burgo emerged from the trash can and sneered, "Taking up reading, Sally? I didn't know you had it in you." "Burgo!" Sally barked, recovering herself. She slammed the book shut. "Get the hell out of my house." "House?" Burgo sneered again. "This beached boat is a house? I've learned how to deal with bullies like you." Sally's words came through clenched teeth. She stomped over to the knife rack. Another arboreal brokerage. "I have to say, I've never heard of beet trees," Count Festive said to Brown, his host and informant. The two men, accompanied by their respective floating spheres, were walking through the extensive greenhouses of the late Granny Pernblack. "Well," Brown admitted, "they're not actually beets, but they do have many of the same qualities." He reached up and plucked one of the round, dark, tuber-like fruits from an overhanging branch. His sphere made one half rotation in response. He held the beet out to Count Festive. The Count's sphere, in turn, lowered itself several inches in the air. "They're edible," continued Brown. "They can be processed to make sugar, and their juice can be used as ink." "Is the taste similar to real beets?" Festive asked. His hands caressed the beet, as if it were a well-seasoned baseball. Brown shrugged. "I don't think so. But then I like beets, and my taste buds are unusually perceptive. Still, they're not bad." The Count considered. "What do you think, Chalky?" he asked his sphere. He pronounced the sphere's name in the academic manner. That is to say, he actually pronounced the letter L. The sphere emitted a smoky beam of green light that enveloped the beet in its master's hand. Analysis indicates the presence of various impurities related to the environmental condition known as vulgarama. The sphere spoke in the voice of Audrey Hepburn. This was a deliberate choice on Festive's part. It had cost a little extra, but the other options were unacceptable. "Can you imagine," he asked his cousin Renee, a sphere speaking in the voice of Dan Quayle? "Or the voice of reason, for that matter," Renee, whose bias against the floating attendant spheres is well known, had replied. "Objection!" Brown's sphere, sounding very much like Jimmy Durante, an exact duplicate of the late actor's voice, was unavailable, as his heirs had forbidden its use, cried, "Chalky's analysis is incorrect. I detect no such contamination." "Are you calling me a liar?" Chalky asked, spinning about once and moving closer to his fellow sphere. Almost simultaneously, shining hooks emerged from the surface of each sphere. Squirrely penmanship in minor key. The legibility of the document, according to Monadness, the baseline supplicant, was entirely dependent on whether one had consumed a sufficient quantity of Weibo, a liquor brewed by the local peasantry from the droppings of the Falk lumber snake. The bulk of the snake's diet is made up of Thorson's black frogs, which, as you know, Monadness drunkenly explained, produce a mildly psychoactive substance in their gonads. Hence, the snake's feces, in turn, is a rich source of the duobacanoids that lend the Weibo its unique kick. "That is all most engrossing," Major Davenport replied, standing like a lighthouse over the ship-killing rocks of Monadness's slouching form. "But can we please get back to the document?" The Major tapped the much-folded sheet of paper. "What does it say?" "Well," Monadness drew himself up and held the paper at arm's length. "It says, how would you like to know the secret method by which Rectangular produced his intriguing masterpieces? For years, art experts have debated." He was interrupted by Major Davenport's assistant, Lloyd Welch. "Excuse me, sir," he addressed himself to the Major, "but this just came in over the televacuum." Welch handed Davenport a piece of paper. "Want me to read that for you?" Monadness asked. His eyes were bloodshot. His hooded sweatshirt was stained in the front from the beet juice he had sloppily mixed with the Weibo an hour earlier. "No, thank you. I think I can manage," Davenport answered. He glanced over the paper and looked up at Welch. Reply as follows. Forgery impossible due to factors inherent in technique. As to legitimacy of central figure, probability 50-50. That will be all, Welch. Yes, sir. The assistant, a competent man in all respects, glanced with disdain at Menadness before exiting the room. Menadness noticed Welch's look and shouted at his back, I note your disdain, and I disdain your note. He cackled once and looked at Davenport. That's telling him, eh, Major? Davenport tapped his chin with a message from Central Sulfuric. I think we can dispense with your services for the remainder of the day, he said.